Hi guys, Jamie here from JB Motion. Today we're going to be creating this bit of motion graphics that you're seeing in front of you right now. We're going to start off in Cinema 4D. We're going to create these little wormy things that are coming into the screen, and then we're going to be rendering them out with a bunch of different cameras, a bunch of different scenes, and we're going to be bringing all of that into After Effects inside of where we're going to be creating this kind of text animation. We're also going to be adding sound effects to this as well. All the sound effects you're going to be able to download from the description below. So we're going to get a lot learned in this one today. So let's get started on this. Here we go. Okay guys, so we're going to grab a helix first of all, and this is what we're going to use our sphere is going to follow along the helix, and then we're going to be using our sphere to use our tracer object. So for height on this, we can go for something like 4,000. And let's grab a sphere as well while we're at it. We can even go a bit higher on maybe we'll go 7,000 on the helix, something like that. And let's increase or decrease the start angle to something like this value. I have -668 there. And we're going to grab an align to spline tag. We're going to put it onto our sphere. So just right click on the sphere object and go to animation tags and grab that align to spline. And the spline we're going to be using is the helix. Let's drag this down into the spline path of our align to spline tag. So now we can animate the sphere like that. So I think I'm going to go a bit more. I'm going to go 10,000 on the height of the helix. So it's nice and long. Let's set the position on the align to spline to 0, or sorry, onto 100. And we'll add a keyframe on frame 0. And we're going to increase the frame range to about 400 frames. We're going to go to the very last frame, which is frame 400, and we're going to set this to 0 and add another keyframe. So now we can see that the sphere is going to be animating along the spline. We don't want that ease in. See the way it slowly starts moving? We just want it to be a linear animation. So let's open up the timeline, and this is already selected. So all we have to do is hit L on our keyboard. It's going to set the animation to be linear. So that's just going to straight off. It's not going to gradually accelerate. It's just going to go straight away without easing in. Okay, cool. So now we have that done. What we can do is we can clone the sphere and the helix. So we're going to get, a number of spheres and a number of helixes. Don't know the plural of helix, but I'm going to go for helixes. So let's grab the two of these, hit Alt-G on your keyboard to put them into a null. And this is what we're going to be cloning. So with the null selected, hold down Alt, and let's just hold down Alt and click on the cloner object. Now you can see that we have a number of these spheres and a number of these helixes. So with the cloner object selected, I'm going to go down here to the count, and I'm going to increase the count along the Y so that we have an even number along the X, Y, and the Z axes. And the size is fine for now. And if we play that, you can see that that's what's happening. So right now it's all very kind of uniform. So we want to mix this up a bit. So we're going to do that with a random effector. So with the cloner selected, go up here to your cloner icon and just click and hold. And there you'll be able to grab a random effector. The reason I've selected the cloner object before I did that is so that the random effector is going to be automatically added here into the effectors panel here, or the effectors tab here. So now that's given us a bit of randomness, and if we hit play, you know, they're still a bit, you know, stiff looking. We want more of a kind of an organic feel to this. We're going to get to that in a minute. I just want to go into the random effector and go to parameters, and I'm going to mess with these a bit. So let's just zero everything out for a second so we can see what we're doing. I'm going to add some position randomness along the z-axis. Kind of like that. So that we have some in the front, some in the middle, some in the back. You can see we're getting some intersections here. So we're going to fix that as well. Maybe a little bit more along the z. And I might even add in another bunch of spheres as well. So, and we could do a bit more randomness along the z axis as well. Something like that. We could add a bit of randomness, random rotation on this. Something like that. Okay. And also what I want this to do is I want them to be kind of separated at the start. So what I mean by separated, so if I do this, kind of like that. So they're all going to be kind of separated at a distance from each other. And then as it comes into the middle, they're going to get really close to each other. And then they're kind of going to separate out again. Or maybe I don't want them to separate back out again. Maybe I just want them to start off separate from each other. And then at the very end of this, they're going to come close together. So to do that, I need to go to my null. And I need to change the position of this axis here. So if I go into turn on enable axis mode here, then I'm going to be able to move this axis, and you can see what that's doing. So now if we bring this all the way to the right here, you can see that that's actually giving me what I wanted it to do. So I can have it now so that they're starting off quite separate from each other. As they go in, they're going to get really close. So I could have them kind of separate off a little bit at the end. That could be cool. So they're going to come in, get really close to each other, and then kind of sprinkle off from each other at the very end. And I might just mess around with this helix again even more. I might go to like 15,000 for this. Something like that. I'm going to mess around with the position of this axis again, so that now they're going to come in, meet each other in the middle, and they're going to have a bit more space to kind of separate from each other at the very end. Okay, I'm not sure if I want them to be that far away from each other at the start. So I can go back to my random effector and just kind of reduce that a little bit. 16. Cool. Okay, so if we just play that now, you can see that this is what we're getting. Just kind of scrub along there. So they're all going to come in and meet in the center there. They're going to be quite close to each other in the center before they spread out kind of towards the end. And that's going to be the end of the animation. So what we can do now is we can add a bit more of an organic feel to this so that the spheres don't travel perfectly along the splines. And to do that, we're going to use a rigid body. And also, what the rigid body is going to do is it's going to stop the spheres from intersecting in the middle. See the way we're getting some intersections there? I might even go into my cloner object and just reduce the size of this down to 100 on X, Y, and Z. So you can get a better idea of what I mean. So you can see we're getting a lot of intersections here. So to stop that from happening, we're going to use dynamics. We're going to use a rigid body tag. And the spheres are no longer going to intersect, but they are going to interact with each other and bounce off each other. Well, not bounce, but they're not going to intersect each other. So if I go back to frame 0, and if I grab my sphere object, right-click on that, go to simulation tags and add a rigid body tag. Now if we hit play, you can see that our spheres are all just going to fall to the ground, right? So to stop that from happening, we're going to be using we're going to go into the rigid body tag, and we're going to go to the force tab. And here we can set the follow position to 5. So now the spheres are going to follow the position that we've already animated, but they're not going to be as stuck on. You can see there they're not exactly stuck onto the helixes as much as they were at the beginning. Now they're kind of moving about a lot more freely, but at the same time, we're not getting any intersections whatsoever, as the rigid body tag is not allowing them to intersect. Even when it comes in really close together, no intersections at all, which is great. So that's fine. I'm wondering, will I make them meet in the middle a bit sooner? So again, to do that, just grab my null, and making sure that the axis mode is enabled, I can bring this back so that they're going to meet in the middle a bit sooner and they have a bit more time to spread out towards the end. Okay. Cool, so I'm going to do a save on this, but I do want to create a place to save this because I haven't done that yet, so just bear with me for 1 second. So this is the folder I'm going to be saving it into, so I'll just grab that so I have it. And I'm going to do a file save as. And I'm going to put this into the folder that I just created. And call it cloner tracer. Cool. Okay, so we have that saved now, and we are now going to set up the tracer. So we're going to select the cloner object because, well, let's not actually. We'll just do this the old-fashioned way. So let's find our tracer first of all, which is under the cloner icon here, and there it is, tracer. Now it's going to look for a trace link. Now if you had selected the cloner before you created the tracer, it would have automatically added whatever was selected into the trace link. So we can just drag this in to here, and now if we hit play, let's turn off the helix, the visibility of the helix, by just double clicking on that top traffic light there. So that's not working. We need to set the handle cloners here to immediate clones. And now we'll see. So that's now working, right? But what it's doing is it's tracing each of the vertices of each of the spheres. So we're getting a lot of splines there. We're getting a lot of tracer lines right there. So we don't want that. We just want one tracer line per sphere. So go back into the tracer object and turn off trace vertices. So now if we see that again, you can see that the spheres are now, each sphere is tracing its own single line. So you can see now we're kind of getting we're getting an idea of what this is going to look like. From the video at the start, we're going to create geometry for each of these splines. They will be splines eventually. They might be splines right now, actually. I'm not sure what you call. I call them tracer lines anyway. They could be splines. And then they meet here in the middle. We're not getting any intersections. And then they're just going to spread out then towards the end. Now we're getting a bit of funny, we're getting a bit of mess in here at the start. See the way that's happening, right? So it's like, We don't want that to happen. We just want the spheres to start tracing from frame 0. If we go back here and hit play, it looks like they trace backwards and then they go forwards. So the reason for that is because of the order of objects in our object hierarchy. So what we want to do is just tidy this up. So first of all, what we want to happen is for the cloner object to do its thing. So that should be at the very top. Then we want the random effector to do its thing. So that should be above the tracer. And then finally want the tracer to do its thing. So that should be at the bottom. So now if we hit play, okay, we're still getting that. Maybe if we bring the random down to the bottom of the tracer. Yeah, okay, that was it. So the order of this is the cloner object clones, the tracer object traces, and then the final thing that happens is the randomness is applied. So again, especially with tracer objects, I mean, order of these objects in the hierarchy is very important. Okay, cool. Now, let's see what happens if we reduce the follow position down to like 1. Let's see what happens. So now you can see that the spheres are kind of moving a lot more organically, actually. They are trying their best to follow. Well, let's actually, before we even talk about that, let's address the elephant in the room. And that is the fact that the tracer object isn't even following these lines aren't even following the spheres, right? And the reason for that is because the tracer doesn't really know how to do that. To fix that, what we're going to do is we're going to bake the dynamics. And to do that, we click on this tag, go to cache, and then we just bake all. We're not going to do that right now because we're not finished twiddling the properties to getting everything the way we look. But once we bake all, then the dynamics are basically going to be an animation. So then the tracer object is going to know exactly where it should be going and what it should be doing. Because right now it just seems to just be following along the original position of the spheres. So if you turn on the helix here, this is what the spheres were following originally before we started adding dynamics and messing around with the follow position. So keep that in mind. We are going to be baking the dynamics to turn the dynamics into actual animation. And then that's going to solve the problem that we're having now in that the tracer isn't actually following the spheres. So I'm not happy with the follow position set to 1. I might go to like 3.5 on that. Let's see if that looks any better. Because I don't want the spheres to be following position too much so that it looks too, too kind of mechanical. I want this to be a bit more organic looking. So I think I'm happy with that. I'm happier with that follow position set to 3.5, I think. And we could even add turbulence so that we're going to get like these spheres would be shaken around a bit more, so we get more wobbly lines. So if I just kind of go up here to simulate forces, and if I set this to, or if I grab a turbulence simulation here, turbulence object, if I just crank the strength up to something ridiculous like 700 and hit play, now you can see that our spheres are going to be like jumping around and all like bouncing around like crazy. So we get really wobbly lines when we do eventually bake the dynamics. But I don't really like that. I like to get these smooth lines that you guys saw in the video at the start. So I'm getting rid of that. And I'm getting these nice smooth lines. Okay, so let's now address the whole situation with the fact that the tracer object isn't doing the best job at following these spheres. So if I look at this from the top view, you can see that it's trying its best, but it's not doing a great job of it. See, these like tracers are just kind of like following their own path. They're following the helix, really, is what they're doing. So let's just file and save this, and now we can bake the dynamics. So grab your dynamics tag, go to cache and click on bake all. And that is going to, it's baking the dynamics simulation. So what it's basically doing is turning the dynamic simulation into actual animation. So we're going to be able to scrub through this forwards, backwards, what have you not, whereas we wouldn't be able to do that with just, you're just using dynamics. If you try and scrub along the timeline, if you drag this time marker to say this frame and then drag it back using dynamics, it's not going to work. You can't rewind dynamics. You can only go forward. But now that we have that baked, we can go forwards, we can go backwards, and all that good stuff. So now we have baked, now that we've baked the dynamics, you can see that each line is perfectly following the sphere. Each sphere is being traced perfectly as it's moving along. So that's what we were after. And that's because we baked the dynamic simulation. We're getting no intersections here when they come in close because of the dynamics tag before we baked it. And now we baked it, we're obviously still not going to get any intersections because we turned the dynamic simulation into an animation. And then they're spreading off there towards the end. Okay, cool. So the next thing we're going to be doing is, well, what I can do is just show you guys how we're going to create geometry using these tracer lines, or these tracer splines, I suppose. So we're going to be using the tracer object. We're going to hold down Alt, because if you hold down Alt and you create a new object or add a new object, whatever you have selected is automatically going to be added as a child of that object. I just need to double check that I am recording. Okay, we're all good. So we're going to select this first, hold down Alt, and then we're going to see where's our sweep object. This is what we're going to be using. Holding down Alt, remember, so the tracer is automatically added as a child of the sweep. Now we need to add in a spline, a circle spline, or I'm going to use an end side. And this time I want the end side spline to be added as a child of the selected object. So this time I'm going to hold down Shift. And now you can see that the sweep is basically sweeping this shape along the splines created by the tracer. Let's reduce the radius of this down to 25, of the end side down to 25. And sides, we can leave it at 6. So now you can see we're getting geometry. But there is another but, and that is we're not going to be able to see this geometry when we render it. Now, don't ask me why we're not able to see it, because if now render preview works, but render to picture viewer doesn't work. So I was messing around with this earlier, and I was like, why isn't this rendering? And I don't know why, and I'm sure somebody does. One of you guys watching probably know the exact reason why we can't see this geometry when we render this out. So I don't know the why, but I do know the solution. This is what I found online to fix that. So we're going to grab our tracer object, and we're going to export this as an, what the hell is it called again? It's a alembic. Okay, so a .abc. We're going to export this out as an alembic, and then we're going to re-import it. It's going to come in as a spline, or a big, a load of splines, and then we're going to basically be putting it into this sweep object. We're going to be replacing this tracer with the thing that we export and import, basically. So let's do that now. Make sure you have your tracer object selected. Just go back to frame 0. Tracer object selected. I'm going to do a file save. Then we go to File, Export, and Alembic. And make sure that selection only is ticked, spline curves is ticked, and click OK. Oh, we have end frame as well. We need to set that to 400 because we have 400 frames in our scene. and click OK on that. Now I'm going to find where I put this, 26, and I'm going to create a new folder, call it Alembic, and I'm going to say cloner tracer ABC. Click on save. So that's going to export the Alembic. I'm going to pause the video here and then I'm going to pop back in when this is done. So that's finished exporting now. So now we just need to import it in. So go to File and, well, Merge Projects. And we are going to, so here it is right here. Let's double click on that and just click on OK. So now you can see we have this tracer spline that's come in. And if we turn off our sweep for now, and if we just hit play, you can see that we have our Alembic here, and it's basically given us a bunch of splines where our tracer once was. So let's pause this. Simply a case now of, well, what we can do is just, we can bring this, we can duplicate this, and let's bring it up here just to keep everything organized. This is turned off, the visibility of this is turned off, so we can forget about that for now. And we're going to replace this tracer object with this tracer Alembic. Delete the tracer object. And now we're going to get the same result. Let's turn on the visibility. We're going to get the same result as we had before, except this time when we render the picture viewer, we can actually see the geometry. Okay, cool. So that's pretty good. So the only thing is I skipped a step now because I didn't finish basically setting up my tracer object to behave in the way I want it to behave. So I'm going to delete this sweep and I'm going to turn back on the visibility of this because we don't want these trails to just stay there. We want them to kind of follow along at the end. So like a tail, I suppose. They're going to follow along. There's going to be a length to this, and as the spheres get to a certain distance, these tails are going to start trailing behind them. So to do that, we go to our tracer object and we set the, the limit to from end, and we can choose a value or an amount. So I'm going to go for something like 40, and let's see what that looks like. So our spheres come in, and now you can see that they're behaving like little tails. So if we go to this view, we can turn off our spheres now, the visibility of them at this stage. You can see what we're getting. So they come in really close to meet each other. Turn off this work plane as well. And then they kind of push away from each other towards the end. Now, I don't think that's long enough for me. I'm just trying to find my, yeah, here they are. So I don't think that that is actually long enough for me, that that amount. So I'm going to increase that maybe to like 100. See what that looks like. Yeah, I think that's a bit better. And I want to see what this is looking like when it gets into the center. It's looking a bit crowded. Like, I feel like I might have too many clones in there, but we'll see. Just pause it here. You know, we are getting a lot of intersections because, you know, it's so crowded. We could reduce the radius of the end side here, something like 15. That's a bit better. At least you see a few gaps there. Might go even down to like 12. That's a bit too thin. I think I'll leave it at 15. I think that's fine. And Yeah, I'll leave it at 15. Now, what you'd have to do if you were unhappy with the amount of splines in here, or trails, or tails, or whatever you're calling them, you'd have to go back to this Dynamics object, the Dynamics tab, and clear all your caches. Then in the cloner, you'd have to reduce the count down to, whatever you want it to be. So you'd have less spheres and less spheres being traced, basically. And then you'd have a lot less of these. But I'm gonna stick with it, I think. It's not too bad, It is quite busy. But I'm going to stick with it. It's going to be fine. So another thing that I've noticed is that the lines are a bit kind of zigzaggy. They're not very smooth. So if I just go NB on my keyboard here, you can see that they look quite smooth when I turn on these lines here. Actually, they don't look too bad. So we'll ignore that for now, because what we are going to be doing is we're going to be setting this up in Redshift, and we're going to be using a Redshift object to smooth out our geometry. A Redshift object tag, I should say, to smooth out our geometry. So we might just leave that for now. I do want to reduce the width, or reduce the radius of these. NA to go back to your Garode shading, however you pronounce that. I do want to reduce the radius of this as you go along. So if I go to my sweep, and if I go to the object tab and just click on the details drop down here, we can reduce the scale of these so that they're nice and thin at the very bottom. And also I want to put a bit of rounding at on the caps as well. So again, go to the sweep. Actually, we should be doing all of this once we've exported the alembic. The only thing I wanted to do, so just ignore that. I'm going to undo that. The only thing I wanted to do was define in the tracer object, define the amount that we're going to limit this from the end. So that is done. So now we can go back and export this as an alembic again, and just replace this tracer object with the export. We can set up the rest. We can edit the sweep settings once we've done that. Okay, so let's do that now. Just do a Control S to save. Grab your tracer object. Go to File and Export. Export to an alembic. Making sure selection only is selected, making sure that you have the right thing selected. Splines is turned on. Everything should be the same as the last time. End frame is 400. Click OK. And we're going to overwrite this one. Okay, so my computer kind of froze up there, and I think that's because I tried to export the alembic and I didn't go back to frame 0. So just go back to frame 0. And then select your tracer and export that out. And I'm just going to overwrite that one. Yes, on that. Okay, so it's exporting now properly. Yeah, just make sure that you're on frame 0 before you export. So I'll pause the video here and we'll pop back in a second. Okay, so that's done. So same thing again, we're just going to merge project and bring that in. And here it is. So we're gonna hide this one away and just gonna duplicate it and make this one visible. Come on. And I'm going to replace the tracer object with this tracer alembic that we just brought in. And now we have our setup, and the tails are trailing along behind like we wanted to. And now we can go into our sweep and we can do what we were doing earlier. Just bring this scale down here in the object tab in details so that we get those kind of thin tails. And we can also put on a rounded cap on this as well. So in the sweep object, go to caps, and we can bring that up to 100. And that is good. Okay, so now we can just start setting this up for, well, we can go into, I'm going to go into my Redshift, do a Control S to save that, go into my Redshift, I have a Redshift layout set up. So if you guys don't know how to get this render viewer up here, just go Redshift and Redshift render view, it's there, you can dock that anywhere you want. I'm going to create a new material, new Redshift material. And I'm going to open it up, and I'm going to go, and I'm going to make it kind of red, something like that. And I'm going to apply it now to my sweep object. And let's get some lights in here as well. So I'm going to go into, we'll grab a light here, grab an area light. You can go up to Redshift, lights, and grab an area light. And I'm going to go into my top view. I'm going to rotate this light so that it's going to be, well, it's going to be, I'm going to place it over here. And I'm going to rotate it as well so that it's facing the, so it's facing our objects. I'm going to bring it over to this side as well, actually, and rotate it 180. And if I go into my front view, I can bring it up along the Y. Bring it a bit further away. And I'm going to go into my right view again. And I'm going to make it long, nice and long, so it's going to kind of light up the whole. So like our guys are going to come in around there. So I wanted the light to go that far back. So it's going to be this long. And the guys are going to go all the way, that's the end. So yeah, that's fine, that light is fine, just so it's going to be long enough to light our sweep as far as from frame 0 to frame 400. So back into perspective now, and we can see what this looks like. So click on render now and see what this is looking like. Okay, so what we can do is we can, well, I suppose we could just say that's the end of the tutorial. I mean, you guys can mess around with the material here. What I want to do is I want to bring up the roughness of this, bring down the reflection a little bit, and I'm going to add some subsurface scattering. I'm going to bring the scatter scale up to something like that. And I think that that looks kind of cool, because if you scrub forward a bit, you can kind of see, like, I don't know, I think it looks better. It kind of looks more like skin or something, like they're worms or something like that. I thought that was a cool kind of a look for it. Let's see, do we need a light behind them as well? We could just grab this. Let's duplicate this light, just holding down control. Let's bring it over here, and I'm going to rotate that 180. What's this looking, is that fair? Yeah, that's, so they're both not really facing downwards. Not that it's making much of a difference anyway. And maybe this light could be, maybe this light could be like a little bit blue. Bring down the intensity of that, let's see. Need to bring up the make it bigger, I suppose. you know what? Don't think that light is making any difference, so I'm just going to get rid of it. And this light intensity, 700 obviously is too much. Bring it down to something like that. Okay, cool. So now we're going to set up a few cameras that we're going to be using to render out. I'll do another save there. And I'm going to go back to my original layout, my workspace here. And I want to set up a few different cameras. So this is going to be our main scene. And I'm going to do a file save project as, and I'm going to go for, we're going to create scene 1. So this is going to be the first scene that we're going to render out. So I'm going to create a camera, create a redshift camera, make it active, and I'm going to find a good position that I want my first scene to be at. So let's see. Yeah, so something like that might be kind of cool. Maybe a bit more kind of diagonal. Yeah, that could be cool, having them coming in from the corner. So I'm going to do a render from frame. Oh, also I need to set this up. I'm going to set up this for like posting on Instagram. So I'm going to go 1280 by 12. No, I'm going to go 1080 by 1080. 1080 by 1080. And I'm going to render this scene 1 out from, let's reposition this camera now. So it's going to be like that. It's going to come in from the corner and go off in the direction of the other corner, like something like that. So I'm going to render that out from frame 61. So I'll set this to 61. Do I need to do it here, or will I do it in the render settings? I'll do it here. 61 up to frame 245. Okay, so let's just have a quick look at what this is actually going to look like in the render view. Set this to fit window and play that. Okay, so that's going to look pretty cool. So Control S or save project, and let's go and set this up for render. So we're going to output all frames, which is going to be 61 to 245. Do we want to put on any depth of field on this? No, I don't think we do. So set this to redshift, obviously, and everything is fine. I'm going to go PNG sequence. We're not doing multipass. And let's go and get a place for this. Sequences. I'm going to create a folder, call it sequences. And this is going to be scene 1. Scene 1. Okay, so that's scene 1 set up for render. And what we can do now is, let's just check everything's okay. Oh, we need to turn on alpha channel. So we're going to be able to add a background inside of After Effects when we're setting this up. Everything else is good. Okay, so again, file save, and we're going to go to render. We're going to go render queue. And we're going to add this to the render queue. That's fine. Now we're going to go and open up our original cloner tracer scene, our main scene. And we're going to find another position for this that we think would be cool to render out, for a camera to render out. So I think that one would be good. So I'm going to go forward a bit, maybe like to here. So I'm going to render this one from frame 128 all the way as far as frame 386. And so let's just do a file save as, and this is going to be called scene 2. Cool. Okay, so that's fine. Happy enough with that. Do a file save, and let's go into the render settings. So this is going to be redshift again. In hindsight now, I probably should have just created this from scene 1, so I wouldn't have to do all these settings again. But I'll do that the next time now for the next scene. So turn off this. We're going to go not there. 26. And sequences, scene 2. Okay, alpha channel needs to be turned on. I'm going to render out all frames. Saves, that's good. Okay, so that's good to go. Save this, and we're going to go render. Bring up the render queue again, and we're going to add this to the render queue. So now we got our scene 1, scene 2 set up for render. Now, instead of opening up the original scene, I'm just going to do a file save project as and do scene 3, so we don't have to do all the render settings again. Should have done that the first time, but anyway. We live and learn. So now I'm going to get another camera angle. So this, I'm just going to use this camera, and I'm going to find a good camera angle for the next one. So maybe they're coming towards the camera the next. For the this can be the final scene. Oh, I didn't set the, let me reopen. Let me open scene 2. Now, we didn't set the dimensions on this. See? I would have saved myself all this trouble now if I just worked from scene 1. Anyway, so let's go to the render queue, and I think we have to delete this. I'm not sure about this now, but anyway, just to be safe. Then we do a file save, and then we go to render, add to render queue. Okay, I think that's okay now. Back into scene 3, and we'll make sure that our dimensions are set up correctly. Cool. And we'll find a nice camera angle for this one. This camera's animated. Let's get rid of this animation. You can just hold down Control, select both of the Y and Z. That's where the animation exists. Just right-click, go to Animation, and delete track. That gets rid of any animation that's attached there. That could be kind of cool. Yeah, I think I'm happy enough with that. Okay, so that's going to be our scene, our last scene. So I'm going to do a file save project, and we're just going to see where we want to render this from. So if we go all the way back to 129, we don't want to start at 129. I think I'm going to go from frame 207 all the way as far as, I do like to see those trails going off the screen. All the way as far as frame 372. Cool. So we can stop this rendering here, do a file, save project, and let's go into our render settings. We can save this out now to scene 3 folder. And save that. Alpha channel's turned on. Everything else is set up because we did it the smart way this time. And that's it, guys. So that's it for the whole Cinema 4D part anyway. I'm going to render this out now. And we're going to bring everything into After Effects and just kind of, you know, put in a nice background, sequence our renders and try and make it look nice. Maybe if we might even find a bit of background music to make it look even, or sound nice as well. Okay, so file, save that, and we're going to go render, render queue, and render, add to render queue. Let's grab this one, the first one, and that's going to render away. So my computer has quite a bit of work ahead of it because it has to render all these scenes. Not sure how long it's going to take. It shouldn't take that long, to be fair. I mean, you can see it's kind of rendering out quite fast, but again, it's mostly black it's rendering at the moment. I'm sure once these start getting into the center of the shot, the render times are gonna start shooting up per frame. But anyway, it is what it is, guys. If you guys want to render out your scenes with less frames just to get through it quicker, I mean, be my guest, it's up to you. But I'm going to pause the video now and we'll jump back in once this is done into After Effects. See you in a bit. Okay guys, so everything's rendered out now, so we can bring all the stuff into After Effects and start putting this together. So these are the sequences, the 3 scenes that we rendered out, so I'm just going to bring in each of these. Now do keep in mind that I probably have more frames than you guys because as you know earlier in the tutorial I was putting little notes on the bottom of the screen just saying how many frames you actually needed to render out, because I only came to realize this after I put it together, which I have done already. But that doesn't matter, it's all good. You have the exact amount of frames as you're going to need for this. So let's start by bringing in scene 1 and then we're going to bring in scene 2 and scene 3. Okay, so let's create a new composition. Go up here to new composition and we're going to set this to 1080 by 1080 to match up with our renders. The frame rate is going to be 30 frames a second and we're just going to call this comp animation. Duration is fine at 9 seconds. We can just add on some more seconds onto that. Click OK. Now, what's going on? Where's my... Yeah, okay. So you can set this to fit so it fits into the window. And we are going to create a new background. Control Y on your keyboard. Why isn't that working? Because I didn't click down here. Control Y. And I'm going to call this background. And the color I'm going to be using for this is actually in there already. That's the hex code. If you guys want to use the same color, you're welcome to. I went with this color because the render, the geometry that we rendered out, I applied a kind of a pinkish material to it. So this is what I'm going to be trying to match it up to. Okay, so click OK on that, and now we have our background. So I need to create a text layer. So click on the text icon there, and let's just type in. I'm typing in my initials. That's set to outline, so we need to set that to fill and set that to white. Now you guys can use whatever letters you want. You might go with your own initials. I'm going with JB, as those are my initials, and you guys can go whatever you want. The font and everything, it's all up to you. Now see this anchor point? I want to make this so that it's right in the center. To do that, I can go up to this icon, hold down Control and Alt, and double click. That's going to center the anchor point in there. And now we can use the align tools to make sure everything's centered up nicely. So we're going to be using, I think, did we bring in scene 2 twice? It looks like we did. Let's delete that and make sure that we have everything in as we need it. So the first thing we're going to be using is actually scene 3. So let's drag this down to our composition, and this is our render. So I want to push this back. It's going to be going, as you know from the start video, it's going to be going through the letters. So we're going to be using the letters to cut a shape out of this. Basically, we're going to mask these using these letters. So we're going to duplicate the JB layer and bring it up to the top. To duplicate, Control D in your keyboard. To bring it up to the top, Control Shift and the right square bracket. And now we can grab this scene 3 sequence and go to the track matte options. And then we're going to go to alpha matte JB2. And there we go. So that's the first part of this done. The next part, we're going to be adding some strokes and animating them. So we're going to grab the JB layer again, Control D to duplicate it. And this is going to be stroke 1, JB stroke, we'll call it 1, JB stroke 1. And we'll make this purple just so we know what it is. And we're going to start animating this. But before we do that, let's double click on this so that we can change this to actually be a stroke. We can click on this little arrow here and it'll swap it to be a stroke. Let's change the color of that to something similar to our background and then make it a bit darker. Something like that. And we can scale this up. So to get my scale properties there, I clicked on the layer and hit S on my keyboard. We can scale this to kind of fit the, actually no, at the start we're going to go to 0% on this. We're going to add a keyframe by clicking on this little stopwatch, go forward a few frames, something like frame 18. Then we're going to scale this all the way up, like that, to about this value. It's going to automatically add another keyframe. And then we're going to go forward a few more frames, and we're going to set this to 100. And we're going to select all of these keyframes, hit F9 to add some easing in and easing out. And I want to further edit these keyframes. So let's just lasso both of them. Let's open up the graph editor by clicking on this icon here, and we can use this fit selection to view. And I want to make this kind of gradually, I want this part of the animation to gradually gain speed, but then at the end it's going to be really fast. So it's going to be slow at the start. So I'm just holding down Shift to make sure that I can't do this. Hold down Shift. Or no, it's not Shift. What is it? Okay, I don't know what it is, but just make sure that you don't do this. You're holding down, I'm holding down, I don't know why I'm holding down Shift now. I always thought it was Shift, but apparently it's not. So this is going to gradually gain speed, and then it's going to be really fast at the end. So let's have a look at that now. I'm just using this method to zoom out. You can also zoom out like this. Let's go out of our graph editor and let's have a look. Yeah, okay, so that gives it a bit more kind of coolness, I suppose, for lack of a better word. And now we can duplicate this layer, select it and hit Control D. And now we have two of them. I want to see the keyframes, so I'm going to hit U on my keyboard. With this layer selected, it's going to show us all of the keyframes. Now, this one, we're going to scale it up. So I'm going to go to the second keyframe here, and I'm going to reduce the scale of this. So we can actually see it. It looks different. And then this one's going to be the same. So this is what we got. Something like that. Cool. Now what happens next is the JB text is going to kind of pop. And then all of a sudden, this pop is going to cause our sequence to just disappear. The pop makes it disappear. That's what I'm going for anyway. So these guys come in, and then there's going to be a pop of this JB text. So we can add a scale keyframe here, and to do so, handy shortcut on your keyboard, hold down Shift and Alt and hit S on your keyboard. That's automatically going to add a scale keyframe. We can go forward a few frames to something like frame 55. So I added the first keyframe at frame 48, going ahead to, again, this is kind of just eyeballing it, 59 this time. We're going to scale this up. And we're going to drop it back down to 100% a few frames later. So we have something like this. So that's way too slow. So I want to make that quicker. So I'm going to drag these two closer together. I'm going to grab this one and drag it closer again. So we get a bit more of a pop. And when that pop happens, just at the very start of that pop, this sequence is going to disappear. So we just have to trim this layer right at this point. Shortcut to trim is put your timeline indicator where you want to trim the layer. Make sure the layer is selected. Hold down Alt and hit the right square bracket. That's going to trim it. So now, as that pops, we also want to turn off the visibility of our strokes as well. So what we can do is we can have the opacity of this reduce as it's scaling down. So let's select both of these layers. Shortcut to add an opacity keyframe is hold down Shift, Alt, and hit T. And that's going to automatically add an opacity keyframe on both of those. And then we're going to go to this keyframe here, which is the scale keyframe of these, and set this to 0. It's going to apply that change to both layers. And now they're going to fade out, so we don't have to deal with those. Pop happens, sequence disappears. And let's select all of these and hit F9 on our keyboard to add some easing in and easing out. Cool. Okay, so I might go for a bigger pop. So I'm going to go to the middle keyframe here, where it's at its max size, and bring that up a little bit more. Cool. Okay. So the next part of this is we're going to be using scene. I think it's scene 1 for this. Let's double click and check. No, it's not scene 1. It is. Well, it has to be scene 2 through process of elimination. So it's scene 2. So let's drag this into our composition. And we can snap this to the timeline indicator by using our left square bracket. Boom, and then that snaps. So that's a handy shortcut there, use it all the time. So that pops, and then these guys are going to start coming in. And they're going to come in to about... Now, I know you guys you don't have as many frames as me as this, so just make this go to as far as the amount of frames you guys have, if that makes sense. So I think you guys have like, how many frames you got? You got like 70 frames, we'll say. So let's go to frames. I'm going to go to frame 69. Yeah, frame 69. I'm going to hold down Alt, right square bracket to trim that. And I'm going to bring this back to where I want it to come in. Pop happens, these guys start coming in. Okay, so these guys are going to come in, and then the JB text is going to be all like trying to swat them away, like you'd swat away a fly. So he's going to do a kind of a little rotation to swat these guys away, and then they're going to cower off the shot. So to make this JB text swat them away, we have to we want to rotate this around the y-axis. And right now, this is just a 2D layer. So to make it a 3D layer, we can just click on this and then it becomes 3D. Then we have access to these orientation properties. We can rotate that around the y. So we're going to add a keyframe on orientation on orientation, just orientation, at about frame 122. Now this might not be matching up exactly to your guys' composition, but it should be close enough. And we're going to go forward a bit. We can even bring this first frame a bit closer to the end of this sequence. And then we're going to add this rotation. We're going to go for something like 232 degrees, and that's going to be our little swat. And he is going to go back to his original position. So we can just grab this initial keyframe, hit Control-C, Control-V. That'll add the original position back there, so we get that swat kind of a thing. Let's add some easing in and easing out. Select all the keyframes, hit F9. And there we go. So that's a bit, I might want to slow that down a bit. So I'm going to drag this last keyframe out a bit. Yeah, something like that. And I'm going to turn on motion blur as well for this layer. So to turn on motion blur, we're just going to click on this little square here, and now motion blur is going to be turned on for this layer. So that looks a lot better with motion blur turned on. Okay, so that's that. He swats. Now remember, we are going to have two of these scene 2 guys. So we're going to duplicate this guy, Control-D on the layer, and we're going to grab our rotate tool and just rotate this fella around. Hold down shift and it'll snap into place. And now we have that happening. He swats them away. And then these guys, just as he swats them away, they're both going to cower away out of the shot. I'm going to back to my selection tool here. And I'm just going to double check that I'm recording. I am, because I didn't record there one of the days and it was pretty annoying. So he swats them away, and these guys, we need to select both of them, hit Control-D, and we're going to, so they're both not up at the, we need to make sure that both of these, hang on, let's just drag this up so they're both beside each other. It wouldn't have made a difference. Oh no, it would have, yeah, you do have to drag that up. And then we need to select these guys, bring these over here, and then we're going to right click, go to time, and go to time reverse layer. So now if we watch this, you can see that they cower off after he swats. So it's not happening at the exact right time, so we need to bring this swat kind of closer to the end of the sequence. Kind of like there. And also we want these guys to cower away a bit quicker than they are at the moment. So select both these layers and we can bring the stretch value here to something like minus 40%. And let's just drag this so it's back where it should be. Yeah, so they kind of speedily cower off there, so it looks a bit better, like they're actually afraid of the JB text. Next, we're going to be using our next sequence, which is this one, scene 1. So we're going to be dragging this down to our composition, and we are going to snap this to the time indicator, and the shortcut for that is left square bracket, and we're going to have these guys come in just as the other guys are cowering away. So maybe about there, maybe even sooner. Oh, I didn't mean to double click on that there. So they're cowering away, and then these guys come in. And we're having another set of these guys, scene 1 sequence. Control-D to duplicate, rotate tool, and then rotate that around. Hold down shift so it snaps. So now we have one of those guys coming in from each corner. So at this stage, JB Text, he's had enough of this kind of situation. It looks like he's being attacked by, you know, like the kind of thing you'd see in The Last of Us or something like that. And he just had enough of it, so he wants out. So what he's going to do is, just before these guys are about to touch him, he's going to zoom off out of the screen. So around frame 213, we're going to go down to the JB text layer. And we're going to add a position keyframe. Shortcut for that is Shift-Alt-P. That's automatically going to add, well, it's not automatic because you have to do something, but it's going to add a position keyframe there. And then we're going to go forward to about frame 218. So just a few frames forward, and we're going to just move JB away from danger. So he's gone. Let's have a look at that. Okay, so we want him to gradually gain speed. We don't want this to be a linear, we don't want this interpolation to be linear, so we're going to add some easing in and easing out. Select both the keyframes, hit F9. Let's go into our graph editor, and let's use this fit all to view. And we're going to have him gradually gain speed. So select this first keyframe, and we're going to set this up so he can gradually gain speed, like that. And that's fine. So I'm just using this method again to zoom out. Again, you guys can do it like this. Exit the graph editor and watch him zoom off. Now what he's going to do is he's going to appear as if he's in a different area, but what we're actually just going to do is we're going to bring him back over here and then bring him back into the shot. So let's zoom in on these keyframes so we can see what we're doing. So this is the first keyframe, position keyframe. He zooms off. I'm going to go forward one keyframe, and I'm going to bring him back to here. So you're not going to see that happen. And then we're going to bring him back in. So we're just going to grab this initial position keyframe, Control-C, Control-V. That's going to bring him back to the center. So it looks like he's, you know, jumping off the shot into another shot. It doesn't yet because we haven't killed off these this sequence yet. So we're going to do that now. So just as he goes out of the shot, this is where we want to trim scene one, both of these scene one sequences. Select them both, hold down Alt, and use the right square bracket to trim those. So now we might even trim those a bit earlier. Just drag those back. Okay, and we want him to kind of not come to a halt as quickly as he does. So let's drag this out a bit. And we're going to select both of these keyframes, go into our graph editor, and let's use this fit selection to view, and we can have him slowly come to a halt. So he's coming in fast, and then he loses his speed right down to the last keyframe there. Let's exit the graph editor, zoom out at this again. And cool, okay. And we're also going to have him kind of do a front wheelie as well. So at around this point here, we're just going to add a keyframe on orientation. Now we've already added keyframes on orientation. So if we use this, we're going to overwrite what we've done already. So we have to use this add or remove keyframe at current time. That's going to add a keyframe there. We can go forward to about here. And let's rotate this around the Z axis this time. Something like that. 25 degrees. And then he's just going to snap back to 0 degrees. So let's see what that looks like. So that looks a bit rubbish. So I'm going to drag this out a bit more. And I'm going to drag both of these to about here. Drag this one over a bit. So that's looking a bit better. But I just want to, he kind of settles back to his 0 degree rotation a bit too quickly. I want him to kind of slowly settle back, and then he speeds up before he gets to the last keyframe. So I'm going to select both of these orientation keyframes, go to my graph editor, and then fit the selector to view. It's hard to see this now, but I'm going to grab this keyframe. Oh, there we go. That's jumped in properly. Grabbing this keyframe now, and I'm going to drag this out so that he's slowly going to fall down, and he is snapping back in. But it all happens a bit too fast, so I'm going to grab these 2 keyframes, just drag those out a bit. Yeah, cool. Okay, so that is good for the animation. I'm going to do a Control S to save, and you guys should be doing a Control Shift S to save as. Because you probably haven't saved yet, and I hope your stuff didn't freeze. I doubt it did. But this is the animation, and it's looking pretty good. Next is the sound effects. So we're going to be adding sound effects right now. Let's bring these guys in. So this sound effects folder, I'm going to provide it to you in the description below. You can download it and you'll be able to follow along with the sound effects, or you guys can find your own sound effects. It's up to you. So I have also named these in the order we're going to be using them. So that is handy. You are welcome. So this is the first one. It's going to be the Magical Futuristic Gate opening. And we're going to drag this down to our composition. And let's have a listen. So that's going to happen there. And I want it to kind of pop. That text pop. I have a sound effect for that as well. Let's double click here and then bring this in. It's the cartoon pop. Drag this down. I'm going to snap this to the timeline indicator using the left square bracket. So that happens there. And then we have the pop. And I want this first one to kind of fade out around this point just after the pop happens, or just when the pop starts. So I'm going to unravel this audio here, add a audio levels keyframe, and around here this is going to drop to like -35, and then we're just going to trim it using Alt and the right square bracket. And then these guys have a sound effect as well as they come in. Let's grab that now. It's water bubbles, constant bubbles. Let's drag this down. And I'm going to use I'm going to put my timeline indicator to where I need this sound effect to begin. Then I'm going to use my left square bracket to snap that. That's a bit loud. I want to turn that down to like something like -10. Maybe not -10, maybe like -8. And then he swats those guys away. So we have a sound effect for the swat as well. It's a whoosh sound, number 4, small whoosh. Let's drag this in. And we can left square bracket to snap that. Cool. And the bubbles sound effect actually continues for these guys because they're not giving up. These guys are still trying to get the JB text. And then just before he zooms off, we're going to add another sound effect, and it's going to be monster. Oh no, we forgot monster demon horses scream. So that is going to be for when these guys cower away. So let's drag that in. Left square bracket to snap it. Oh, I didn't drag it in. Then left square bracket. turn that down a little bit because it is a little bit loud, down to like -5. And just before he zooms off, we're going to have number 6, fast wheels, whoosh. Snap that again. And then we're going to have the final one, which is the tire squeal brakes. And that's going to happen right about there. So I think we need to lengthen the time it takes him to fully stop because the brakes sound effect is quite long. So I'm just going to drag these out. Even more, I'd say. Cool. Okay, guys. So we can just have a look at this. Control S to save. Okay guys, that's it. Thank you so much for sticking around till the very end, and I hope you did learn a lot. Hopefully you did. If you didn't and you knew all this stuff, then I suppose the question is, why did you stick around till the end? No, seriously though guys, I do appreciate your time, and I appreciate your guys' comments, and everybody who does subscribe. Thanks very much. If you guys haven't subscribed and you would like to see some more of my stuff, please do hit that subscribe button and don't forget to smash that like. Thanks again for watching, guys, and I'll see you in the next video.